Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to teach some Python programming basics today. Before I even start talking about more technical details here, one must understand why the Python is very famous, and whereas any researcher in many fields are very interested in Python, or what makes it very interesting and interesting language. So one reason is that Python is very easy to use and very easy to learn, and it's a very powerful language at the same time. And Python has a very simple, elegant, and very beautiful syntax. So this readability makes it a great first programming language, which allows you to think like a programmer, but you don't need to waste a lot of time understanding this mysterious syntax like other languages require. Let's look at an example here. So here, this table demonstrates the differences between Java and Python syntax.
Audio is not working.
Sorry, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so in Java, as you can see here from the syntax, just to print a word "hello world," it takes at least, you have to write at least 7 lines of code. But in case of Python, you just have to write one single line just to print or just to display a word. So this explains how easy and how elegant the syntax is. So to install, to get the Python, just go to the link that displays here, and you could download any version that you want based on your OS. I am using 3.6 version here, and it's a standalone installer, so you should be able to install it very easily by clicking next and next. But if you have any problems, you can go to this link to install. You get a clear guide step by step from this link. So once you've installed it, you can actually find it in your from your taskbar. And once you find the Anaconda Navigator, just launch it. And this Anaconda Navigator gives us all the applications that you can use here. So these are all the applications that you can see once you launch the Anaconda Navigator. And you can launch Jupyter Notebook to code for the Python. So I'm going to use Jupyter Notebook here. So let's get into the more details now, since you have known how to install the Python. So everything in Python is represented by an object, and object can be a variable, a data structure, a function, or a method. And every object in Python has 3 characteristics: object type, value, and identity. So, but what does that mean? What is a variable, or a data structure, or a function, or a method? So variables are nothing but without memory locations to store the values. This means that when you create a variable, you're going to reserve some space in the memory. And based on the data type of a variable, the interpreter is going to allocate the memory and decides what can be stored in the reserved memory. So this can be a variable. And you can always allocate a value to your variable using assign a value to your variable using equal to, and the type of the variable here would be a string. So based on this data type, the interpreter will allocate the memory and will decide how to store in the reserved memory. So here I have an example. Is string. So string is any finite sequence of characters like letters, numerals, symbols, and punctuation marks. So it can be basically it can be any sequence of characters. Could be words or could be numbers, since they're all in a sequence. And I've also mentioned data structure, and data structure is a particular way of organizing and storing your data So you can later access it, modify it, or perform some other functions as you want. But I've just mentioned data, but what is data here in this sense? Data can be is any sequence of one or more symbols that has some meaning. So it can be a sequence of numbers or a sequence of words, sequence of letters, whatever the sequence it is with a meaning, that can be a data here. And the example for such data structure is a list. And as the name suggests, list is a linear collection of data elements of any type. So here we have a number list, and the value for the number list is a list of some numbers, and the type of this object would be a list. And this list can contain letters, linear collection of words, or can be other types of data, like another nested list, or it contains a list and a list. So it doesn't matter as long as it has a linear collection. And I've also mentioned a method or a function. And a method or a function is a piece of code that performs an operation on an object. And I'm going to discuss more about this in the next in the session. And each object contains different types of methods or functions based on the data type. And we should also remember something important is that some objects can be mutable, some objects can be immutable. Mutable in the sense that once if you have created an object with a value, and later if you want to change the value, you should be able to change it. But if it's immutable, once you have created or executed, you won't be able to change the value anymore. Those kind of objects are called immutable. And some of the standard data types that I'm going to show today are numbers, strings, and lists. So once you have once you launched your Jupyter notebook, it's going to look like this. I just have to go here and get a new notebook, Jupyter notebook, and then you can actually start writing your syntaxes. And okay, so now I've talked about a lot of data types, methods, and I've talked about a lot of things. But what if I gave you an object, but you don't know what that object is, and you don't know what kind of methods you can perform there, and you don't know what to do with that? And then what are you going to do? So for example, I've given you a word Python. So, and this is a string, as I said before, and the strings can be enclosed in a double quote, or it can also be enclosed in a single quote. And then you just have to press Shift and Enter to run your code. So now it says the word is Python. All right, so now you want to see what kind of data type it is. To do that, you can just type type, and put your object inside a type and enter it. So now Python says it's a string. So now we know what kind of object it is. So now we know what kind of object it is, but you don't know what other methods are available with this type. So to find out that, you can just type directory function and type your object and enter. So now Python has given me a list of methods that you can perform on this object that you have. Okay, so now you have a list of methods, but you still don't know what this method is going to do. In that case, you can always take help from Python by using help function, and then just have to type your object dot and upper is your method, and just have to type your method and then run it. And now Python is telling you what kind of method it is and what it is going to do to your object. So now you know what type of object it is and the methods available with it, and what this method does to the object. So now you can apply the method by using upper word is an object here, object and method, both you can join them using a dot, a full stop, and then with brackets, enter it. So now it has given you the uppercase of the object Python. So this is how you can check help when you don't know what to do with any object, or when you don't know any method to follow. Okay, so now you know how to deal with the objects. Let's start with some basic data type, numbers. Like the other programming languages, Python has the very similar operators, the similar type of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And the one thing that you should always remember when you're using operators in Python is that it always gives you the division always gives you the decimal with a decimal. So it always returns a float. Float is nothing but a decimal points. So if you don't want the decimal, if you don't want the fraction part, you can always use 2 double slashes and for your multiplication and for your division. Then it just gives you, just removes the fraction and gives you the number. Okay, so, and also if you use modulus, it gives you the remainder. So these are, and if you want to do the power, it gives you so you have to use double stars, and this gives you the 10 to the power of 3. So these are some of the basic operators that you can use with numbers. Yet there are a lot of other things that you can do with numbers, but it's not possible. Since it's not possible to tell everything, I'm just going to go into the next step. Okay, so now let's talk about the strings. I just said what a string is, and the strings can always be enclosed in a single quotes and double quotes. Let's look at a string Python, as I said, as I showed before. So Python takes the double quote, but I also said it can also take the single quote. Is it true? And let's check it out. And yes, it also takes the single quote. Okay. All right. So the most important thing that you have to remember about the strings is that strings are immutable. So once you have created and once you have run your code, you shouldn't be able to change your value anymore. So let's try if it's true or not. Let's try to change the first element of the word. Now it has given me the error because it's immutable, and so that's why I'm not able to change the value once I've created. So in that case, we can always use the concatenation function, or we can also slice the word, and then we can change our values since it's immutable. So how does the indexing in Python works? Let's see. For example, so we have a word Python, and in Python, the index always starts with 0. So we have the final index as 5 from left to right. Okay. Now let's try to see the word 5. So now it has given me the word 5 as n. Okay, so now this leads us to the next question, that is the indices always works with positive numbers. No, you can also give the index as negative numbers from right to left. Obviously, -0 is nonsense, so we start with -1 and end with -6. And now let's see what it gives me for -1. So it has given me the last element. -1 element is the last element. Okay, but how do we apply splicing here? So to slicing here. So for slicing, you can use a range, the starting limit. So this would be the starting limit. So this can be the starting limit, and the end limit always gives -1, which means, okay, so let's take from 0 to 5. Let's see what this gives me. So this gave me till O, which means it excluded the last word, because it always gives me 5 -1 limit. So if you want till the last element, you should always give +1 extra to get the final element. Okay. And also something that comes very handy is that you can use this to always reverse your string. Okay, so another question comes now is that what if you forget to give the last limit, the end limit, by just giving the starting limit? So it gives you from 0 till the end. Or if you give 1, it gives you from 1 element to the last element. And what if you give this? So it gives me from 0th element till 4th element, 5 minus 1th element. So this is how you can actually use your indexing and slicing with strings. So let's see how to concatenate 2 strings by using slicing function. So I want to slice, I want to add concatenate T from 1 to 6. So now it has it gave me from 1th element to 5th element by adding it to the new string. So this is how we can actually create a new string, even though the older string, the already executed strings are immutable. All right, so these are some of the, so this comes very handy when you deal with strings. Now let's start with the list. List can be written as a list of comma-separated values, as I showed before for the data structure example. And list always has to be inside square brackets. So the square brackets. And list can contain different types, different data types, but usually we always have the same type. And like the strings, lists can also be indexed and sliced. And not just the list or strings, all the other built-in sequence types in Python can be indexed and sliced. Okay, so now we have a list of squares. Okay, so now I have a list of squares. Let's see if it's going to, the indexing works exactly same as strings. Yes, now it has given me 0th element in a list, and the indexing works exactly the same. Okay, another important thing and the difference between these string and these lists are that list is a mutable type, which means once you have created your list, you should be able to change the values after the execution. Okay, for example, I have a list of cubes here with All right. So now I see that I have made a mistake by writing 65 because it's not 65. Now I want to change the value of the list here. So since it's mutable, we can always change our list value. And yeah, now I have changed it. So it's always immutable. You can always change it once you have created the object. Okay, list can also be nested, which means list can contain another list, and that list can also contain a list. And so basically you can have a list of lists. Let me show you an example. So 1, 2, 3, and another list. Okay, all right. So now I have a list with a list in it. So how do we index such type of list? So to get into such type of list, first let's see what is a third element here. So Python thinks the third element is a list. Now, if you want to go to if you want to go inside this list, once you have got into this list, and then you can write the index for the list that you are already inside, which means, so now I've got the 0th element in the third element in the list 1. Okay, so so this is the same way. So it works the same. If you have another list, and if you have if this third element contains another list, then you write another index, and you get into the that list, and then you can always do operations with your elements. Okay, so this is how you work with the nested list. So let's see some more methods for the list that comes very handy. So now I've given you, for example, if I give you element and you want to put it into this list, how do you do it? You can use something called append, and this always appends the value or the element into your list. And you should always remember that this append always appends into the list at the end. So let's see, I want to append 8, and yes, now it's appended into the 8, into the list. Okay, so now you want to remove something out. So you can use something called pop to remove your element. And here inside the pop, you always use the index of the element that you want to pop out. So for example, I want to pop something, the second element, and see, now it has popped the third 3, which is a second index, which is in the second index. All right, so what if you use the pop without any index? So it's going to pop the last element in the list, which means so append and pop always works as last in, last out. All right, and you can also extend your list by using list.extend with a list of elements. And now let's look at the list now. So now I've extended my list with more elements. So you can extend it by using extend. And also there is another method that's more useful here is remove, to remove something. But one thing you have to be very careful when you use a remove or a pop is that remove uses a value. You have to give a value for the remove. Pop takes the index. So I want to remove 9. So now it removed me 9. So this is always value, and for pop you always use the index. And another handy function is that delete. So for a del, you can use a range or like an index range. So for example, 0 to 1, and let's look at the list again. So now it has deleted the element 1 from the 0th part, because as I said before, the right index is always right, limit is always -1. So it just deleted 0th element. But if you don't give anything, the delete going to delete your whole list. So when you use delete, you should also be careful. So let's see. Now the Python gave me an error because it already deleted the whole list and there is nothing called list1 here. So now I've got the error. So yeah, so these are some of the very basic and functions or basic syntax that can come in handy when you start programming. Okay, so now let's see how to write a very simple and basic function. To write a basic function in Python, to write a simple function, you have to use def statement. And the syntax looks like this. So you start with the def, and then you write your function name. Write with a function name, and then you have to use this brackets, and inside the brackets you can use your parameters. You can use your parameters list. You can also keep it empty if you don't have any parameters, but you can also give your parameters. But once you have run it, we call it arguments, and then you close it with a colon, and then you start writing your code and your statements, whatever you want to give here. And then once you're done with it, you can call your function. So the one thing important is you should always have your body of the code inside your first line, because if it's somewhere here, the program is going to think that it's outside your function, but it's not inside. So it should always have a one tab from the starting. So this is how you write your basic syntax. So now let's write a simple function. Okay, so now let's define a function with the name simple function, and I'm not going to give any parameters, and these parameters has to be given when you the values for these parameters has to be given when you're calling the function, which means you can say that they are kind of input that you want to give to the function, and then it's going to take that input and it's going to give the output later. And close it. I'm not going to use any parameters. And let's say my variable name is name. And an input function, it's a function where you can, it's a function which lets the user to give the input once the program is run. So you don't have to give the parameters, or you don't have to give the arguments when you're running this one. So I want to take a name. I want to take name as an input, and then I wanted to print hello with my name. All right. So the name. Okay. So now my function is ready. My simple function is ready. Now I want to call this function. So you can easily call the function by writing your function name. And if you have any parameters that are written, you give your arguments here. So the values for your parameters list that you're written here, so you write it here. Since I didn't give any parameters, I'm just going to run it just like that. So now it's asking me what's my name. So my name is Monica. And now it says, hello, Monica. So this is how very basic syntax that you can write. Sorry. Oops. All right. So to summarize it, I've used, I talked about numbers and their basic operators, and talked about integer and how to deal with float. And also, we also talked about strings, and that strings are immutable, and but still they allow us to do slicing, and it allows us to index the strings, and we can also concatenate them. And we also talked about list, and lists are mutable, and you can also nest the list, and you can concatenate them, slice them, append them, and do a lot of other functions with them. And also seen a very basic syntax for writing a very simple function. And my second tutorial is going to be on controls for choose, such as if statements, while statements, for and break and continue, and also going to show how to put this into a function and do further programming. And I will go more into the details. Thank you so much for your attention, and hope to see you next week.